Welcome to this video, and we are going to speak about something that few of us, including myself, ever think about, and that is, once Jesus fulfilled the death verdict, what about her? What are we to make of her? Are we to forget it? Did she, when he rose, stay in the tomb? Is she to go to sleep, and sleep in Hebrew ties with death? Is she to be forgotten? How does he treat her? There is incredible prophecy that awaits you in this video, as well as the next one. Oh, you mustn't miss the next one, because there in verse 9, she's asked by the women of Jerusalem while she's on her big search for the groom. She encounters them, those daughters of Jerusalem, and they ask her, why is your beloved more than another beloved? And she answers them. And if you know that the word beloved ties with David's name, and Son of David is a messianic title, they're asking her, why is your Messiah the Messiah? Why is he better than any other possible candidate that we can dream up for the Messiah? And she answers them in the most fearsome testimony of Jesus that goes line by line in a few verses, and we're going to speak about that in the next video. But first, the wisdom for end-time Christians as to what to make of the fire bride after the resurrection of Christ. How does he regard her? Where does she come to play? So in the previous video, we've spoken about this sleepy bride. And recapping briefly before we go into the next, because remember, Song of Solomon is one prophecy and the one verse goes into the next. And this video is actually part of a series. And if you don't follow what I'm saying now, it's because you haven't watched. Please go and watch the playlist. And I tend to speak in the beginning and telling briefly that the woman is the fire bride. You need to know that she's the justice wrath of God. And that's not something that people often realize, because God in his Holy Spirit has opened it in our time to help us. But there's a deep level of prophecy in the woman. We found it right from the beginning there in Eden. That's a reason why Jesus was seen there being anointed by a woman who was anointed by Mary, and having the Mary woman also there by his resurrection, and she being the one that searched desperately there for him, weeping, wanting him, and looking for a corpse, and then ended up talking to Jesus, and he sends her off to be a witness. So why would the greatest king of the world be witnessed by the most unexpected person, a woman? Why a female witness, and why somebody that anoints him, which is not a male? Because it breaks the pattern. Usually it's a male. It is something that seems to people so unacceptable they would protest it. It's because of the prophecy, because even that protest is part of the prophecy. The woman referenced the fiery justice and wrath of God, particularly in a bridal image, because remember in Genesis, the only suitable helper for the groom was the woman. So she is the Isha that ties with Isha, the fire. She's got strange descriptions, and all of that's prophetic. Click on the channel, watch the second video in the playlist, and you'll see she ties with songs. Regarding that in the next video. Who is she? She's God's wrath and justice. Who is he? He's God's salvation. So God's salvation, Jesus, was taken into death by God's wrath, and then he turns it around and rules over it and is risen. And he says that she must now come. All right, she must come. And he actually leads her out of their place, out of that place where the bed was. In other words, out of the tomb. She's searching for him. It is based on her love for him that she goes after him. In other words, God has created a situation where his wrath loves to see. Jesus means salvation. God's wrath loves salvation. So why does God's wrath get up again? Why is it established there after Jesus died? Well, how can that still be standing, God's wrath? Because of its heart yearning to see salvation. She comes to witness and see God's salvation stands. So she stands and he stands. To stand in Hebrew means to establish. God's salvation is judicially, soundly established and standing. Jesus breathed out his breath, to give life, because he has breathed out, because he has died, that is now giving him the power by the opening, the power by the latch, resurrection. He loves and yearns for him. In other words, the justice in yearning towards seeing salvation established. So now she stands too. Okay? The justice is established. So the fire is not dead because of Jesus fulfilling her. The fire is not going into a place of non-existence, of sleeping and staying forever in the tomb forgotten. No, it is called to come out. It is called to follow him in love. Jesus, if you think about it like this, Jesus is the lamb slain. When he rose, his death testimony accompanied him. He didn't walk out as the lamb as if he never died, but he came as the lamb slain. We see that when he showed to Thomas the proof of his death, showed his death testimony. It was accompanying him. We see the same image in Revelations, the death testimony of the lamb slain accompany him. So he doesn't depart without her. She's not left in the tomb. She's not disregarded. She's not lying there by herself while he's gone. No, he's by the door and he says to her, get up and come. In other words, when it gets up, when the fire gets up, it means you stand. In other words, you're established. And she says, I arose. In other words, I stand established. Punishment for sin is respected and taken. It stands. He is now ruled over her. At first, she took him, but now he's taking her. But he's the one that's ruled over her. So she's leaving that place and following him. I opened for my boiling wine. I opened, and you see that she still has all her power. Her hands, right, your power ties with your hands, is dripping myrrh. Myrrh ties with bitterness, so she's got power of bitterness. And her fingers, your fingers is your grasp. She's got fingers of myrrh, right, again. She's got a grasp of bitterness, so it is the same bitter death testimony. She's got all her power. And it is all over. There we find that curving, that handle. If you think about a handle, it's something that bends down. So it's all over the going down, all over the death testimony of that lock, of that fastening up. And she stands established because he took her. And we would expect with her that he's now going to come back to her, but he doesn't. She says, but my beloved has turned. Turned, in the Hebrew there, ties with depart, crossing, passing over. Jesus crossed over from the death's arms into the life. He crossed over, he departed into resurrection. So when she stands established, because he fulfilled her, she obeys his calls, he rules over her. She stands, and he doesn't come back to the bed, he doesn't come back to the death, but she comes out to follow him in the life testimony. She says, I sought him, I found him not. I called for him, but not he answered. Now she's desperately seeking him. There's something beautiful in that. Because if you think about that, she is the fury, the wrath of God that's supposed to consume us, that has her eyes desperately seeking for God's salvation, Jesus. Did you hear that? God's justice is desperately looking for God's salvation. What is supposed to consume you and me? Desperately looking to see how God saves you and me. Right? The wrath is looking for salvation. And she looks for him, she calls for him, and off she goes in the search. See that in the next verse. So what do we have here? We have the fire. We have the bitterness. But remember, her fingers is dripping bitterness. So we have the bitterness woman on the loose now. She's looking for Jesus, right? He's her groom. He rules over her. But she's on her own here. And we find that something else finds her. Found me the watchmen who went about the city. They struck me. They wounded me. Took away my veil from me, the keepers of the wall. What is that? Okay, in the deepest level of prophecy, there is something awesome awaiting you. On the first level of prophecy, well, the woman is probably being attacked and persecuted, the one that witnesses Jesus. is disregarded, that we find here, viciously not accepted. But in the deepest level of prophecy, we find that there is gods, and they are the gods of the city. Now, more than likely, the city is Jerusalem, which means peace. So the God of peace, which comes through the death of Jesus, is seeing a fire, God's wrath, on its own and finding it totally unacceptable, because she needs to be with Jesus, not there with us. Right? How can the fire be on its own? And we find that it strikes the fire. And if you think of how do you stop a fire that is where it shouldn't be, by hitting it. All right, so the fire is, they try to quench it. They try to get rid of this fire without the groom situation, which shouldn't be. And they wound it, they take away the veil. Now a veil, if you think about a veil, it's a big cloth. So if you open up a veil, it would be like spreading out. In other words, it is the fire's spreading out, the fire's expansion. And they take away the fire's expansion. They are the gods of the city. And in Hebrew, the word for city, it's incredible. It ties with opening your eyes, like waking up. Resurrection does. And peace, if it should be Jerusalem. But let's stay with what's in the prophecy, waking up. So the gods hedging, going about, hedging, resurrection, opening eyes, finds a fire on the loose, tries to get rid of it by striking it and prevent its, take away its spread. In other words, it says, what are you doing here, fire? You're not supposed to be here in the place of resurrection. Where's Jesus? You can't be on the loose without him. Because we cannot have a fire. The fire is not there coming for us in the place of resurrection without the accompaniment of the groom. The fire is not gone. The fire is not left in the tomb to sleep. We're not to disregard it. The groom wants that fire to be standing and established still. It actually is looking for him. It's tied up with him. And should the fire be on its own in the place of resurrection, its expansion is prevented, shouldn't be without him. So we don't face her without him. Okay? So that's the first knowledge that we have. But there is more. Alright, so here's prophecy. That ties with the previous, although it looks as if she's talking with a different group, and well, in the literal she was, but God is using that to continue the conversation of your wisdom gathering. Okay? She says, I charge you, daughters of Jerusalem. So daughters in Hebrew ties building Jerusalem peace. She's saying, I charge you. In other words, I charge building of peace. What is it with charge? In Hebrew, that word ties with sevening. In other words, fulfilled. I fed to the full. She's saying, I fed to the full the building of peace. Right? So in the previous verse, in the deepest level of prophecy, not talking about the literal, but the deepest level of prophecy, she was on her own in the place of resurrection, waking up eyes there. The God that goes around that resurrection, that protects the resurrection, says, fire on the loose, I'm preventing your spreading, I'm heating you like you do with a fire, I'm extinguishing this fire because this fire can't be here. But she says, oh no, I can be here. I fed to the full the building of peace. So the fiery justice wrath of God is permitted to be there because it fulfilled peace by being united to Jesus. And she then sends a message. If you, in other words, building of peace, come across the beloved boiling, if you come across Jesus who has died, tell him that I am afflicted, I'm sick, because I have affection for him. In other words, tell Jesus that I'm maltreated, that I'm sick, that I'm afflicted and grieved because I love him. Alright? We mustn't disregard God's wrath and justice. We must understand that God did a wonderful thing there by that love relationship between his justice and wrath and Jesus that took it on himself. She says she was used to bring forth peace, to help build peace, because she was united to him. And therefore, we must respect God's justice and understand if he didn't die, there's no redemption to us. And it shouldn't be hurt and afflicted because it loves him. Building of peace must tell him that. All right? So what is he going to do? Now, staying with the depth of prophecy, and then I'm going to quickly step into the first level of prophecy because it's necessary here. Okay, so in the deepest level of prophecy, she's talking to the daughters there of Jerusalem, and they ties with building Jerusalem with peace. In other words, she is God's wrath. She talks to building peace. She's saying to the building of peace that they must give a message. In other words, the building of peace must go and tell Jesus that God's wrath is now being disrespected here because it loves him. And they say, what is your beloved more than another beloved? In other words, what is the one that you boiled? Beloved was boiling in Hebrew. What is the one that you boiled? In other words, what is Jesus that you now have killed? What is Jesus more than any other wild, any other beloved? Fairest in Hebrew was brightest of togethernesses of women. What is Jesus that has died, boiling in God's wrath, more than any other one that could have been boiling in God's wrath? That you so charge us. Okay? Charge means 7 feet to the full. That you so fulfilled us. Who are they? The daughters of Jerusalem. In other words, the building of peace. How can you claim that you fulfilled, that you was part of the process of fulfilling peace? 7 us, 7 the building of peace. How can you say that you were part of building peace? Because what is so special about this one that you have killed? Why is he the one that you've boiled, Jesus who died, better than any other one that could have been dying in your wrath? Brightest, fairest in Hebrew the brightest, togetherness of fire. How can you claim that you fulfilled peace? Okay, so that's the deepest level of prophecy, and she's going to answer how her and Jesus' unison brings peace in a frightening way. But there, now we need to take a step back, because there's another level in this, where the woman of songs, we've spoken about that in the very first video, and I don't think we really have spoken about it again, because the depth of prophecy is actually where one should move, because there it fully becomes the song which is Solomon's, and you can see the whole of the testimony is about God's redemption plan in Jesus who has died. When you go to the deepest level of prophecy, where the woman is the fire, it's God's justice and wrath, and Jesus is his salvation. But there is a first level of prophecy, and that level, not talking about the literal one, but the first level of prophecy. In that level, we find that she is an end-time Christian that knows the identity of the groom. We've spoken thereof in the first video, and for sake of length, I'm not going to explain why one can say that. If you watch the first video, you'll see. And she's now going to witness to the women of Jerusalem, and they ask her in this verse, what is your beloved more than another beloved? If you know that beloved in Hebrew ties was David's name, and David is messianic title, what are they saying? They're saying, what is your Messiah? Who's her Messiah? It's Jesus. She knows it. What is your Messiah more than any other Messiah? What is your Messiah better than any other possible Messiah that we can dream up? And apparently there's been a few candidates through the centuries. What makes him the real deal? Why is your groom the one? Why is your Messiah the real Messiah? That you so charge us. She's going to tell them why Jesus is the real Messiah. She's going to do that in the language of God that He placed in her mouth thousands of years ago. See you, by God's grace, if it's His will, in the next video. Is Jesus the one? Is He the one? Why do you say He's the one? Answered by God. God is awesome. See you soon.